I was cleaning out a drawer in my home office when I found an old credit card I had closed years ago. I stared at it longer than expected, and a quiet discomfort settled in my chest. It wasn't because the card was still active, and it wasn't because I still owed anything. Those problems ended years ago, but the feeling that surfaced had never fully left. I sat at the kitchen table, turning the card between my fingers. Before I realized it, my thoughts had drifted back to my 20s and the choices I wish I could forget. Whenever our savings goal falls short, I don't find myself angry at where we are now. Instead, I feel frustrated with the person I used to be, as if today's gaps are still following me. My name is Clara, and I've realized something uncomfortable. The hardest part of our financial journey may not be fixing the numbers, but forgiving the version of myself who made them. I opened my banking app that morning and noticed my savings had grown a little. It should have felt encouraging, but my mind immediately drifted to how much larger it might have been if I had made different choices years ago. While preparing breakfast for Myra, I moved through the usual routine without much thought. Yet the familiar voice of self-criticism quietly returned before the morning was even over. A question surfaced out of nowhere as I stood there. Why had I spent so much on things I never truly needed back then? Later that afternoon, I reviewed the monthly budget, and everything looked manageable. There were no surprises, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was behind. Armand walked past carrying a basket of laundry and told me he was proud of how far we'd come. I smiled back, but the words barely settled inside me. Instead of seeing progress, my attention kept returning to the years I felt I had wasted. The distance traveled seemed smaller than the time that had passed. That night, I closed the budget book and turned off the light. Once again, I went to bed feeling as though I was still paying for the mistakes of my younger self. A few days later, I started noticing the pattern. It seemed to show up every time the topic of money entered my mind. Whenever I reached a financial goal, relief would come for a moment. Then my mind immediately shifted to how much farther I should have gone. Even small progress rarely felt worth celebrating. Instead, I found myself counting all the time I believed I had lost. At first, I told myself it was motivation. I thought I was simply being disciplined. But the more I sat with that thought, the less it felt like discipline. It started to feel more like a punishment I kept repeating. I kept comparing who I was today with an ideal version of myself that never really existed. Somehow, I always came up short. For the first time, I asked myself a different question. What if I had never truly forgiven my younger self for those years? That question kept following me through ordinary moments of the day. It surfaced while washing dishes, folding laundry, and waiting for a pot of water to boil. I started revisiting old financial choices in my mind. Impulse purchases and unnecessary installments returned as memories that once felt completely normal. Each memory arrived with a sense of embarrassment. It felt like I was looking at someone I barely recognized anymore. Then another realization began to surface. When I made those mistakes, there was still so much I simply didn't know. But the version of me today resisted remembering that. It seemed more interested in assigning blame than acknowledging the context. I was expecting my 20-something self to have wisdom that only came years later. The expectation felt impossible when I looked at it closely. The more I noticed that contradiction, the more unfair it seemed. I sat with that thought, letting it settle without looking away from it. From the outside, our life seemed to be moving along well. Myra was healthy. Armand followed his usual routine, and the warmth of home stayed quietly around us. We sat together at dinner and laughed about small things. Nothing felt wrong, and no tension showed itself at the table. Yet inside my head, another conversation kept going. It continued quietly in the background, no matter what was happening around me. If only I had been smarter. If only I had started saving sooner. Old thoughts lined up one after another without stopping. Every sentence seemed to begin with, if only. None of them ever arrived at a peaceful ending. I was beginning to feel tired. Not because of the numbers, but because I kept returning to the same memories. It felt as though I was living two lives at once. One existed in the present, while the other remained inside regret. One afternoon, Myra sat on the living room floor with her drawing supplies spread around her. I stayed nearby, quietly sorting through a stack of documents while the house settled into its usual rhythm. Her attention stayed fixed on the page, as she carefully added each person. The drawing slowly became a picture of our family. When she finished, she held the drawing up for me to see. A proud smile spread across her face as she waited for my reaction. "This is Mom," she said, pointing to the small figure with long hair. Her voice carried the simple certainty that children often have. I smiled at the drawing before noticing something else. "Why does Mom look sad?" I asked. Mira paused for a moment before answering. Then she softly said, "Because Mom often looks like she's thinking about something that's already happened." I sat there without saying anything. That simple sentence reached deeper than she could have known. That night, after Mira was asleep, I kept thinking about what she had said. It wasn't about money or savings, but about something that had already happened long ago. A clearer picture slowly began to form in my mind. For years, I thought I was focused on building the future, while part of my energy was still tied to judging the past. I pulled out an old notebook and opened to a blank page. Then I wrote a single question. What am I actually sorry about? The list grew longer than I expected. Old debt, impulsive purchases, missed investments, and decisions that now seemed foolish filled the page. Then I read through everything again. For the first time, something about it looked different to me. The woman who made those choices wasn't the same person I am now. She was younger, more uncertain, and carrying fears I had almost forgotten. I finally noticed something I had never questioned before. I had been judging my 20-year-old self with knowledge that only arrived many years later. A few days later, after Mira had fallen asleep, I sat beside Armin in the quiet living room. The house felt still, with only the soft hum of a fan filling the space. I broke the silence and told him there was something I wanted to share. Armin turned toward me right away and listened. I admitted that I still felt angry with myself. Armin looked confused as he quietly asked what I meant. I told him it was about the financial mistakes I had made years ago. Somehow, those memories still followed me even now. Armin stayed quiet for a moment before a small smile appeared. Then he reminded me how easy it is to keep looking behind us. I lowered my eyes and admitted that I often felt we should have been further ahead by now. The thought had stayed with me for a long time. Armin reached for my hand and held it gently. While I focused on how much farther we could have gone, he quietly saw how much we had already done with what we had. That night, I decided to try something different. It wasn't a big change, just a simple exercise before going to bed. I wrote down 3 questions and looked at them for a moment. At the top of the page, I titled it, "The Younger Me Compassion Test." The first question was simple. Would I speak this harshly to a younger friend? The answer came immediately. No. The second question followed. Did I know everything I know now, back then? Of course I didn't. Then I read the third question. What small action could I take today instead of replaying yesterday over and over? Something about that question felt different. For the first time, my attention shifted away from regret and toward action. I closed the notebook and set it aside. My mind didn't feel perfect that night, but it felt a little lighter. Weeks later, I still thought about some of those old financial mistakes from time to time. The difference was that I no longer stayed with those memories for very long. I started seeing the past as a teacher instead of a judge. And I realized there was a meaningful difference between those two roles. If you're still carrying shame from financial decisions you once made, I want you to know you're not alone. Many of us are learning as we move through life. If stories like this accompany you as you build a healthier family life, financially and emotionally, you're welcome to join us by subscribing to Clara's Family Journal. And now I'd like to ask you something. What's one financial mistake you've eventually forgiven yourself for?